right, should we get started? Okay. Well, welcome back to Saturday class. Good to see everybody. Your faces anyways. The first thing that I wanted to talk about this morning is your first exam. You have two options in taking it. You can go to this address here, and you can take it online, or at the end of class today, you can take one of these paper copies, and you can take it home and do it, and just bring it back next time you meet. Okay, so you have either option. The one thing to make you aware of is this is also where all the study material is. So if you're Elsa is going to bring some copies and stuff from the human development lecture last Saturday. So you have that, but all of the lectures and the video recordings and stuff can be found there with stuff while you're doing the exam. So that's where all the learning material is. So, okay, any questions on that? All right. So the topic that we are going to cover today is learning and memory. And last week, last Saturday we met. We talked about how people change over time. And the point, one of the points that I hope got out of that by doing human development before this is that how we develop and learn over time as human beings in the real world is a very complex system. Okay. We're going to try we're going to try and simplify it today by looking at some general rules and principles of learning and memory. But the thing that I want everyone to keep in mind is these are simple rules that we can identify in a lab, but they're much more complex to try and measure them in the real world. Okay. So to start, let's talk about the difference between learning and behavior, learning and memory as far as the study of it is concerned. Okay. When psychologists talk about learning, we're talking about changes in behavior in response to some environmental contingency. Okay, so theoretically, when a child does something right, you reward them with a treat or a praise, that behavior will increase the next time the child is in that situation. That's kind of the idea. So when we're talking about learning, we're talking about changes in behavior. Okay? When we're talking about memory, we're talking about knowledge. If we're talking about what you all are doing today, and that's hopefully gaining some type of knowledge or insight about behavior and memory and whatnot. So if you want to think of it this way, what we do in the classroom is memory. What you do at home as you shape your child, shape their behavior is learning. Okay. And to kind of give you a history, at least from an American perspective, we're going to start by talking about learning and learning theory. Learning theory actually started with what was called the behaviorist movement here in the United States. Okay. A gentleman, John B. Watson, was really dissatisfied with Freudian theory, with what was coming out of structuralism in Germany and all of that kind of stuff, because he felt like it was pseudoscience. And he wanted to make psychology a hard science, just like physics or geology or chemistry. Okay? And so what he proposed is that the only thing that psychologists should study are those things that can be observed. Okay? And what are the only things that can be observed? A contingency in the environment and the response of the organism. Okay? And everything else in between, such as mental processes, such as the way they think about it, intelligence, all of that kind of stuff does not matter. All that matters is that we measure environment and response. Okay? This is going to take over American psychology for about 60 years. It's going to lend to some general rules about learning, but as we will see later on, it starts to break down and it starts to fail because you have to take into consideration the way people think about their environment. Okay?
I can see it from here. Oh.
So this launched behaviorism, okay? And it's actually going to have some huge implications both on our education system and on our parenting. Okay? Because we already have Freud pretty much saying moms are responsible for how their children turned out. Okay? But now we're going to have behaviorists come in and say that everything about a child and a child world is shaped by the environment. Okay? Watson famously stated once that bring me your child, it doesn't matter if they're poor, rich, minority, majority, it doesn't matter who they are, but tell me what you want them to be, an attorney, a doctor, whatever you want him or her to be, and using the rules of classical and opera conditioning, I will make them. That extreme perspective actually ended up in one of our first parenting books, written by John B. Watson, which states that parents shape their children by their words and their actions, and that's why your child will turn out good, and that's why your child will turn out bad. Okay? Meaning, it doesn't matter what your child's dispositions are or your personalities are. It is the parents who shape that disposition and personality. Okay? This, of course, has had huge influences on both parenting in the United States and our education system, because it is believed that a child's failures are due to the parent's inability to control that child's environment. Okay? And that anything dealing with a child that is negative or positive is the fault of the parent. Okay? And same with in the education system. If the teacher is not doing their job correctly, then the child fails. But the child will not fail on its own unless the environment is not rich enough for them to thrive. Okay. That's John B. Watson, yeah. And you can kind of tell that that has had a huge influence on the way we view parenting and the way we view our education system. The idea of rote memorization, repeating something over and over and over, is a behaviorist notion. And the way we educated for up until at least the 1980s was based on behaviorist ideas. Okay. We're going to see that while there are general rules of shaping and developing behavior in and of itself is much, much more complex. have to take in the mind, as we will see. Okay? There are 3 types of learning that we'll discuss this morning. The first one is called classical conditioning, which is how we learn based on associations in our environment and physiological reactions we're having. Okay? Classical conditioning determines the majority of our behavior. Okay? Because in a given day, we make on average around 20,000 decisions. Okay? You make 600 decisions just getting in your car and turning it on. All right? Even though you think that you're making all of the decisions, you're not. If you doubt this, next time you go out to your car, I want you to sit and think about every decision you have to make in order to get in that car. That includes where you're going to place your hands, which fingers you're going to use to pick up the keys out of your pocket, how you're going to pull it out of the pocket, how you're going to reach over and select the key, and then after you select that key, what movements are you going to make to put the key in the door slot or the button? I forget that there's those options these days. And then how are you going to grab the door handle, pull it, and open it? Which leg are you going to put in the door first? Okay. Each and every single one of those movements is a decision that you have to make. Okay. And they are all classically conditioned, so it seems like you're just making one smooth transition. But the brain is actively working on making each and every single one of those decisions for you. Okay. So that's classical conditioning. We'll go over it from the person who kind of first researched it, which was Ivan Pavlov. Okay, we'll get to him in just a minute. The next type of learning that we'll talk about will be, it was championed by B.F. Skinner, who came up with the term operant conditioning. Okay? Operant conditioning is learning based on operations, and operations meaning some behavior that the organism commits. Okay? And it's the basics of reward and punishment and those kinds of things. If you reward a behavior, it should increase. If you punish a behavior, it should decrease. Those concepts come from the work of B.F. Skinner. Okay? And then the last one that we will talk about is a type of learning that is very unique to human beings, and that is what we call social learning. Okay? We have not found another organism that engages in the type of social learning that human beings engage in. Okay? So if you look at a little bear cub and whatnot, and you watch him observe mom do something, and then the little bear does something, okay? That's called mimicry. Okay? The little bear is mimicking the behaviors of the mother bear, okay? Human beings take mimicking to the next level, okay? Because we have the capability of watching mom, watching grandma, and watching an aunt do something. Okay? And then weeks later, when let's say they were making a dinner, okay, some type, okay? We watch all of them do that. And then a couple weeks later, we can mentally combine all of them, and then we can commit a separate behavior based on that observation from weeks ago. So maybe mom does it a certain way, grandma does it a certain way, and aunt does it a certain way. We're able to combine all of those mental images, and then weeks, months, sometimes years later, we can then commit those behaviors. We don't have to mimic them right away. Okay? And human beings are the only ones that can engage in that type of social learning. Okay? And we will talk about that when we get to near the end of all of this. Okay? So To begin, we should talk about, so we're going to talk about these three types of learning. But across all three types of learning, there are three general rules that determine that can be found in all three types of learning modalities. Okay? The first one is generalization. Okay? Generalization is the ability to learn that that banana and that grape are both fruits, okay, and that they both are sweet. Okay? Discrimination is the ability to learn that one is yellow, one is green, and they're going to taste different even though they're of the same category. Okay? And then spontaneous recovery, and we'll see all of these in a few minutes as we talk about the types of learning, is when we think we've extinguished a behavior, but then for some odd reason it returns all of a sudden. Okay? And kind of bites us in the butt, as we'll describe. Okay? So I'd like to start with this video because one, it's funny, it's in the morning, and it kind of highlights the things that we'll be talking about. So.
Okay, so Kim, the night manager, went on maternity leave, and her husband's name is Sandy, right? So get this. Her replacement is a woman named Sandy, whose husband's name is Kim. Wow. No. What are the odds?
Easily calculable. We begin by identifying a set of married couples with unisex names. We then eliminate those unqualified for restaurant work, you know, the aged, the imprisoned, and the limbless, for example. Next, we look at the sex.
It's an amazing coincidence. Can we leave it at that?
I'm sorry. Oh, Penny. It's as if the Cheesecake Factory is run by witches.
Sheldon, it's as if you don't think I'll punch you.
Come on, you guys, let it go.
Fine, whatever. Are you finished?
Well, thank you. How thoughtful. Would you like a chocolate?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
What was that? You said be nice to Penny. I believe offering chocolate to someone falls within the definition of nice.
It does, but in my experience, you don't.
There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Yeah, now that's you, obnoxious and insufferable.
Oh, sorry, Sheldon. I almost sat in your spot.
Did you? I didn't notice. Have a chocolate.
Thank you.
You're here a lot now.
Oh, am I talking too much? I'm sorry.
Thank you. Chocolate?
Yes, please. Oh, hey, Kim. Yeah, you know what? Hold on. Let me take this in the hall. You'll never guess who they got to replace me with.
Okay. I know what you're doing.
Really?
Yes. You're using chocolates as positive reinforcement for what you consider correct behavior.
Very good. Chocolate?
Sheldon, you can't train my girlfriend like a lab rat.
Actually, it turns out I can.
Well, you shouldn't.
There's just no pleasing you, is there, Leonard? You weren't happy with my previous approach to dealing with her, so I decided to employ operant conditioning techniques, building on the works of Thorndike and B.F. Skinner. Yet by this time next week, I believe I can have her jumping out of a pool, balancing a beach ball on her nose.
No, this has to stop now.
I'm not suggesting we really make her jump out of a pool. I thought the bazinga was implied. I'm just tweaking her personality. You're sanding off the rough edges, if you will.
No, you're not sanding Penny.
Are you saying that I am forbidden from applying a harmless, scientifically valid protocol that will make our lives better?
Yes, you're forbidden.
Bad, Leonard.
Oh my gosh, you did it.
What could she possibly be talking about for so long?
Obviously, waitressing at the Cheesecake Factory is a complex socioeconomic activity that requires a great deal of analysis and planning. Bazinga. You know, using positive reinforcement techniques, I could train that behavior out of her in a week.
No,
If you let me use negative reinforcement, I can get it done before we go to bed.
you're not squirting her in the face with water.
No, of course not. We're talking very mild electric shocks. No tissue damage whatsoever.
Forget it.
Oh, come on. You can't tell me that you're not intrigued about the possibility of building a better girlfriend.
I'm not. Penny's qualities, both good and bad, are what make her who she is.
You mean like that high-pitched, irritating laugh?
Yes.
You wouldn't prefer a throaty chuckle?
You're not changing how Penny laughs.
No, that would be incongruous. No, I was going to lower the whole voice to a more pleasing register.
Oh, sorry, guys. That girl is freaky.
Come again?
Freaky.
Freaky?
Yeah, freaky.
Have a chocolate.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm going to make some warm milk and then turn in. I trust if you two are planning on engaging in amorous activities, you'll keep the decibel level to a minimum.
Of course.
Thank you. Unbelievable.
I was just thinking we should probably turn into.
Well, my new bed got delivered. If you come over and put it together, you can stay at my place.
Really? That's a lot of work and it's kind of late.
Yeah, but if we stay there, we won't have to be quiet.
Let's go.
Interesting. Sex works even better than chocolate to modify behavior. I wonder if anyone else has stumbled onto that.
All right. That's a good example of where we're heading. So, in fact, one of your assignments, first of the semester, will actually be to condition someone of your choice, be a partner, a kid, an animal. I'll show you how to do that and how to work it out. So that's kind of where we're heading. So again, I just wanted to bring up the behaviorist approach and what we're talking about, because the difficulty people have with this conditioning thing, reinforcement, punishment, association, is they forget that we have to take out the brain or the thought process. Because the mistake that a lot of people make when they're trying to change someone's behavior is they're not actually trying to change a behavior. They're trying to change an attitude or an emotion or a frustration. None of those things are behaviors. Okay? So if you're going to apply the techniques that we'll be talking about today, if you're going to make someone less angry, you can't use these techniques. If you want them to display less angry behaviors, meaning the behaviors of anger, then you can use these techniques. It's kind of like the same thing goes with a tantrum. You cannot change a tantrum, but by the behaviors of a tantrum. Okay? So those are kind of just keep this in mind that we need to take out the whole brain, which includes emotions and attitudes and beliefs, and only focus on the given behavior that we're displaying. The two major types of learning are classical conditioning, which is what we call associative learning. Okay? And in this example is when you go to a doctor's office and you get a painful shot, the doctor's office comes to represent pain. Okay? Most commonly, if you think about this as a dentist, a young child goes to the dentist prods and drills in his mouth and makes it painful. And then the child, every time you hear that sound and everything, you get that pain response. Okay? That's associative learning. Okay? It doesn't take any behavior of the organism for classical conditioning to occur. Okay? So in classical conditioning, the organism itself does not need to commit a behavior. It just has to have an association of a stimulus. Okay. Operant conditioning, as the word operant suggests, is when the organism commits a behavior, and then dependent upon whether that behavior is rewarded or punished, determines if that behavior is committed again. Okay. I think we'll kind of get into some of the rules and laws that govern that. So, interestingly, Ivan Pavlov was a Russian scientist. In fact, he's probably one of the most famous Russian scientists that we're aware of. And it's kind of interesting because he was not actually a psychologist. He was a scientist studying digestion. He actually should be more well known for things like antacids than classical conditioning, because he was one of the first to actually measure acid in the stomach, those kinds of things. What got him famous in the world of psychology is one time he was doing a study of salivation in dogs. And what he would do is he would take these measuring kind of glass things, and he would attach the glass measuring device to one of the dog's salivation glands, so that when he gave them certain types of food, he could measure how much the dog salivated, and that's what he used for a measure of salivation. Okay. But one day, as all myths and legends go, Ivan was sitting there watching the dogs, and without any food present, he noticed that the dogs started to salivate. And he was trying to figure out why, if there's no presence of food, would the dogs start to salivate? Okay? And so he kept observing this time and time again, and he started to realize that the dogs started to salivate when they heard the assistants who fed them footsteps go in. And it was the footsteps that the dogs were starting to salivate to. Because normally, the sound of footsteps meant the presentation of food. Okay? And this launched a whole entire research into what we now call classical conditioning. Okay? Because to experiment on this, what Ivan Pavlov did is his famous study with dogs and bells. Okay? So first of all, let's talk about some terms. So the first one you'll see up here is what's called a UCS. And this is what we call an unconditional stimuli. Okay? And then a UCR is an unconditioned response. So a UCS is any type of stimulus that will create a natural response in the organism. Okay? So the presentation of food will automatically and unconditionally create salivation. Okay? And then some other terms is a neutral stimulus. Okay? A neutral stimulus is a stimulus that does not create that unconditioned response. Okay, so in Ivan Pavlov's classical thing is a bell should not result in salivation. Okay, and so what Ivan Pavlov argued is if you pair the bell with the food over and over and over, and then just present the bell in and of itself, that will create salivation, okay? So once these two things are paired, your neutral stimulus with your unconditioned stimulus, that results in what we call a CS, or a conditioned response stimulus, and a CR, which is a conditioned response. And so it's, again, based on his findings, that's why you can see an advertisement for food and all of a sudden you start to salivate, or you just see those arches and you can start to smell McDonald's foods. Okay? All right. Whether you enjoy it or not, that's said for some reason there, right? Okay. Now, this also explains a large variety of different behaviors. When we get to abnormal psychology, we'll talk about phobias. Okay? Phobias are largely classically conditioned, okay? And the like. So, probably some really good real world examples of classical conditioning that I can think of comes from actually treating addicts in the prison system. We have found that, so in the prison systems, hopefully, not all of them do this, but a good number of them do it, is you bring an addict into the prison system, you detox them, and then you put them through some type of treatment or programming, such as relapse prevention groups, such as cognitive restructuring. Basically, you give them all the tools necessary to not be an addict when they're released. Okay? That's kind of the goal. What we have found, though, is that when you release that offender back into the community from where they came from, you get a very high recidivism rate. Okay? But when you release them to a community where they don't come from, the recidivism rate goes way, way down. Okay? And the reason is that when you release someone to the same situation they came from, they have all of these conditioned stimuli that was associated with the drug or alcohol use, which increases the cravings to use drug and alcohol and results in a relapse. Okay? But when you release them to a community where they did not come from, you get the absence of all of these conditioned stimuli. And because there is a reduction in the stimuluses that are associated with drug and alcohol stimulus, you get a reduction in craving, and the individual is able to learn how to live a life without drugs and addiction, okay? Without constantly being bombarded by these cravings because of associated stimuli within that similar environment, okay? So that's probably one of the best examples I can think of to kind of show how conditioning really influences our behavior. Another one is that
but putting them there, knowing that there's that still around them, does it still keep it at a lower rate?
it does, as long as that environment is different than not. Okay. Yes, there's drugs and alcohol, and most addicts know the drug culture and know where they can get it. But if the stimuli around them is enough different from the environment they came from, that reduces their craving and drug-seeking behavior. That makes sense. Some other more practical examples is you shouldn't eat while you're studying, okay? Because what that means is that when you take a test, you should be eating while you take the test, okay? Because you're making associations while you're studying around that stimuli, okay? And so your ability to take a test in the absence of that stimuli, it becomes more and more difficult. In fact, what the biggest suggestion is, is that when you're studying and when you're learning stuff, you should learn it in different environments. So one day you should study outside, another day maybe you should study on the couch, another day maybe down at the library. And that way all of those different associations are broken up, and you learn this material in diverse, generalized environments, that it doesn't become that specific thing. Okay? So actually learning in one set environment can actually inhibit your ability to generalize knowledge and use knowledge across situations. Okay? But this is classical conditioning, and there's three kind of phases, as we can say, that go along. So in the acquisition phase is when a conditioned stimulus is paired with an unconditioned stimulus, blah, 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 they're paired. And then when the conditioned stimulus is presented by itself, and if it's continually presented by itself without the unconditioned stimulus, it will go extinct eventually, okay? Dependent upon the strength of it, okay? And then, if there's some rest period, and that conditioned stimulus is presented again, we get this thing called spontaneous recovery, meaning the conditioned stimulus will all of a sudden just set it off again, and here you go again. Okay? The best example of this I can think of is in relationships, okay? So you find the right guy or gal, whichever way you go, and you associate them with the good things that are going on, the feelings of love, their face, their everything about them, right? And you're making all of these associations, and you're classically conditioning that this is the person, the object of love and obsession, okay? And then, let's say for some reason you break up, okay? And eventually, those emotions and feelings will become extinct, okay? Meaning they'll go away eventually, okay? But then let's say months go by, and you don't see this fellow or gal for some time. and then all of a sudden you run into them in the grocery store. Okay, that experience, all of a sudden, all of those feelings and those emotions come rushing back. Okay, some of you've experienced this, I think. So you cognitively made through that situation. Mhm.
And then he barely turned and said, that word.
Uh-huh.
Check me out real fast so I can leave.
Excellent example. Excellent example. Another example is has anybody ever got stuffed on like Cheetos or something, and like the craving for Cheetos goes away, but then all of a sudden, like a month later, you're in the store and there's that damn bag of Cheetos, and you're like, it made me sicker than hell last time, but here we go again. Okay? That's another example of the spontaneous recovery notion. Okay? There are some things that do not experience spontaneous recovery, and those are things that produce disgust. Okay? Things that produce disgust do not have spontaneous recovery. So, for example, oh my gosh, this was in 2004. I started taking a new medication, and I had a incredibly horrible response to the medication. I mean, it made me sicker and sicker. But that night, we had fettuccine Alfredo. Okay? And even to this day, I cannot even look at that stuff. If we go to an Italian restaurant with my kids, they have to ask the waiter to keep the menus there so that they can put the menus up so I don't see the plate of Alfredo. Okay, and that was back in 2004, and I still have that immediate response to just that stimulus. Okay, and that's what I mean is disgust. Severe disgust does not produce spontaneous recovery. Now, some of you may ask, well, what happened when I drank so much that I almost died, but I still drank the next weekend? That's not disgust. That was poisoning yourself. So if we're going to make food comparison, I need to make that disclaimer real quick. And disgust, as we will see when we get to social psychology, it's kind of interesting because when you see another human being that just like, you just want to have that kind of person in their life that just, no matter what, there's just something about them that you just want to erase it, right? Okay? And the interesting thing about that type of person is the area of the brains that are in operation and the areas of the body that start becoming hyperactive are the ones that deal with what happens when you eat something bad or when you smell something that is bad for you. Okay? You get that choke feeling, you get the gustral, your stomach starts producing more acid, and the areas of the brain that are associated with gastrointestinal processes when dealing with tainted food is what starts to fire. Okay, so people, you are actually having a gastral response to it. Kind of interesting. Okay, it's kind of gross too.
You used to say, I got turned around and
Exactly.
but you kept thinking of them.
And it's kind of interesting because us taking care of our food intake actually does influence our perceptions of other people. So, for example, if you know anybody that is going to sentence you from a judge, make sure that, or try to make sure that they get on the judge's schedule either at 1 o'clock or at 9 a.m. Okay? Because if you get on their schedule just before lunch or later in the afternoon when they're hungry, your sentence, severity of your sentence will increase by 160%. Okay? So for example, for the same exact crime, at 9 a.m., at 1 p.m., a person might get 2 months of probation. Just before lunch, later in the afternoon, that 2 months of probation will end up being about 4 years in probation. Okay? Totally based on whether or not the judge is hungry. Not based on the person, not based on the situation, not based on the evidence, but whether a judge is hungry or not actually determines sentences better than any other measure of sentencing. Kind of an interesting thing. Huh? I hope they've read the studies. It'd be nice. Or, you know, if you offer the judge a snack or a brownie or something, but it's kind of interesting, this association we have with food and social judgments. We tend to be more discriminatory. We tend to be more honoring. We tend to see people in less than a positive light when we're hungry than when we're not. Kind of an interesting. But anyway, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about classical conditioning. Those are kind of the processes associated with it. Okay? So that's classical conditioning. Now, the key aspect is, remember, the organism did not need to do anything to make the association that those golden arches represent food. Okay? There was nothing that the organism needed to do. That's what makes it different from what we call operant conditioning. Okay? In operant conditioning, we have some type of event that ignites some type of behavioral response in the organism. And then if they're either positively or negatively reinforced, that increases the probability of behavior in the future. Okay? If they're positively punished or negatively punished, that reduces the probability of behavior in the future. Okay? Some things about terminology, okay, is when we're talking about positive and negative, this is not an affective or emotional thing. This isn't meaning that it's a positive reinforcement or it's a negative reinforcement. It means adding and subtracting. So positive, we're going to add something to the situation. Negative, we're going to take away from the situation that creates a reward. Okay, so let's look at this from a practical perspective. Okay, child finishes his or her homework, so he gets a chocolate sundae. Okay, we added a chocolate sundae to the situation, so that would be considered positive reinforcement because we added to it. Okay. Negative reinforcement is when we're going to take away something that becomes reinforcing. Okay. So the best example is a smoke detector. Okay? Smoke detector goes off, bleep, 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 bleep. And depending on whether you have a baseball bat or not, you'll escape the situation or you'll knock the smoke detector off the wall. Once that beeping stops, that's the reinforcing moment, is you reinforce that behavior you just committed, which I hope would be in the room to avoid the suffocation of smoke. Does that make sense? Okay. If we look at this from a punishment perspective, positive punishment is when you add something to the situation that becomes punishing. So, kid gets caught with his hand in the cookie jar, so you swat him across the butt. The addition of the swatting across the butt is a punitive thing, so probability reduces that behavior in the future. Okay? Negative punishment is when we're going to take away something normally reinforcing. So this is the traditional kid doesn't finish their homework, so you take away their PlayStation. Okay? That then enters them into a negative situation, which they'll try to get out of by not doing whatever behavior it was. These probably all sound familiar. You know, we have these elements of timeout with negative punishment. We have the idea of giving stickers and rewards for positive. But the problem that a lot of parents have when they're trying to use these techniques is we're actually using them wrong. Okay? Because once you enter the element of decision making, these rules of conditioning no longer apply. Okay? Because the organism has a decision whether to commit a behavior or not commit a behavior. Any type of reinforcement or punishment no longer applies within those situations. Okay? Operant conditioning only works when the organism naturally does a behavior, and then that behavior is either reinforced or punished. Okay? So the mistake most parents make is saying, if you do your homework, you will get a chocolate sundae after. Okay? After you've done that, that chocolate sundae is not a reinforcer anymore. It's now just another decision the organism is going to make. Okay? However, if your child is doing their homework and then you randomly show up with the chocolate sundae, then this applies. That behavior will now become reinforced, and they'll commit that behavior in the future because it wasn't a decision that reinforced the behavior. Okay? So an example of this also is, so when parents set up rules for the house, okay? A common mistake when setting up rules, which is a very good idea, is that parents automatically also give the consequence of breaking those rules. Okay? So we can reverse this formula. So you can put in your house, say, in our house we do 1, 2, and 3. Okay? And then when the child says, well, Mommy, what happens when I don't do 1, 2, or 3? The simple response should be, wait and find out. Okay? You shouldn't give a consequence to a behavior because then you introduce the element of choice. Okay? And for many children, being spanked in that immediate moment is not a consequence enough to not commit that behavior. Okay? Does that make sense? You shouldn't give a consequence along with it. Those consequences should be right, exactly.
I say that all the time.
Yes.
That when kids were growing up. And then other one was, we'll see.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So here is just some examples of positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. You turn in your homework on time, the teacher praises you, that increases the behavior again. Okay. You wax your skis go faster, you do it again in the future. Negative reinforcement, you turn in your homework on time, teacher stops criticizing you for not turning in your homework. That again is reinforcing. Okay. You watch your skis, people stop zooming by you on the slope. That's also reinforcing. Okay. All right. So these are just some examples of this type of reinforcement. Okay. What I want to do really quick is talk about where operant and classical conditioning are occurring in the brain. Because I want to talk for just a couple minutes about tantrums. Okay. The area of the brain where operant and classical conditioning occurs is not in the frontal cortical logical areas of the brain. Okay. They are occurring in the limbic system, in the amygdala and the hypothalamus, okay, in what we would consider the irrational areas of the brain. Okay. And when they're reinforced in those areas of the brain and those behaviors are committed in those brains, it does not take any conscious effort to commit those behaviors. Okay? So that's the first thing that we should understand about operant and classical conditioning is this is not a conscious thing. Okay? If it was a conscious thing, you would make all 600 of those decisions to get into your car this afternoon. Okay? But they're all processed in the limbic system so that you don't have to. So for a minute, let's talk about tantrum behaviors, because usually when you're in a grocery store, you see a child screaming and hollering and being a brat. Who do you instantly blame? The parents, okay? Because they should be better parents. We cognitize it, okay? We make it so we assume that there is a dispositionally something wrong with the parent and probably that annoying child. Okay? I want you to take that out of your frontal cortical areas because what's going on there is the rules of classical and operant conditioning. And both the mother, we'll use moms as an example, and the child are both differentially being reinforced for the tantrum behavior. Okay, so I want you to take us through this. Child is in the grocery store, wants a candy bar. Mom says no. Kid starts to scream and yell and yell and scream and yell and yell. Mom gives in, gives the child the candy bar. The child is positively reinforced for that behavior. Additionally, mom is negatively reinforced for that behavior. So the child is reinforced positively because you gave something to them to reward. This is a thing you have to remember. You're rewarding that negative behavior. Okay? The mom is reinforced for doing that behavior, giving the child the candy bar because the child stopped screaming. The child took her out of that negative state. So what you have in a tantrum situation is you have two individuals that are conditioning each other to do these behaviors. Okay? And it's a kind of an interesting thing because when you're trying to help a mom or dad, whoever it may be, stop having their child do a tantrum, you actually have to train the parent more than the child. Because one interesting thing that you'll find is that parents encourage their children's tantrum behaviors. In a couple studies, that what we did is we had people follow the mom or the dad through the grocery store, and they would constantly pass by closer and closer to the items that would set off the child. The parents had no conscious reality that they did that, but they would push their child unconsciously in a situation that would cause that tantrum. Once the tantrum started to occur, then we got into this reinforcement process where they would reinforce each other. Parents also set up a tantrum in the car. And remember, the execution of that negative state was positive for the parent. So when a parent says, we're going to go in the grocery store and you better be good, what message is one actually? I need to be reinforced again because that felt good. This is happening on an unconscious level. Because that felt good last time that behavior extinguished. That's actually what the parent is telling the child. Okay? So actually when we're extinguishing tantrum behaviors, much of the focus actually has to be on the parent and their learned behavior and not actually on the child. Okay? And then the other parts of tantrum behaviors that I like is that they're classically conditioned, because children may throw a tantrum at Safeway, but not at Circle K. Okay? Same candy bars can be at Circle K versus Safeway, but for some reason a child mostly will only throw tantrums in specific situations. Okay? And again, it's not, and this is what we're saying, it's not about the actual stimuli, the candy bar itself. It's about that reinforcing interaction between the parent and the child. And the association of safe ways becomes associated in the child's mind and in the mother's mind, that's where those behaviors will be committed, even though Circle K has the same exact Snickers bar as the Safeway does. And we can also see this in other behaviors. Children sometimes will only throw tantrums when the parent's there, but not when the child care provider or the grandparent. Okay? So again, we have to take in the learning conditions when we're just extinguishing tantrum. Okay? And again, I want to point out, this has nothing to do with sometimes it does, but not always. It doesn't always have to deal with a parent who is a bad parent. It has to do with a situation where two limbic systems are being reinforced mutually for a given behavior. Okay? So think about that when you have those moments. Well, it's whoever got reinforced initially in the situation. So a lot of the time it's going to be mom, but we do know dads, when they've been absent, have the need to reward their children with treats and junk and all that kind of stuff. So those behaviors can start with dad too, even when he's been absent. Okay. Any questions on that? The other thing that comes up before we leave the kind of examples here is spanking. Okay? Is whether or not spanking is an appropriate punishment or not. Okay? From a non-moralist perspective, is spanking bad? The answer is no. Okay? It is dependent upon a couple things, though. Okay? Is punishment only works when the punishment is congruent with the behavior the child or sometimes the adult commits. Okay? punish or you over punish, that person will still commit the behavior. There has to be a contingency or a congruency between the behavior and the punishment committed. Okay, so if you're going to use spanking, you have to think about what situations your child's in that would make spanking congruent with the behavior they committed. Does that make sense? Okay. So in other words, if they're stealing a cookie out of a cookie jar, spanking is not going to extinguish that behavior. Okay. Doing some other parenting thing with that probably will. Okay. Spanking a child after he slaps his sister, will that work? Yes, because the punishment is congruent with the behavior. Okay. So from a non-moralist perspective, does spanking work? Yes, as long as it's congruent with the child's situation. The mistake that most parents make with spanking is they spank the child out of their own personal anger and their own personal frustration, right? And in those situations, the child is not associating stealing a cookie with the spanking. They're associating the parent with the spanking and the fear they have with the parent. Okay, so I see these things on Facebook all the time that my parents spanked the shit out of me and I turned out okay. And it's kind of interesting because if we actually go and interview those people who say, yeah, I was spanked all the time, they actually never stopped committing the behaviors they got spanked. Okay? That's the lie they're telling themselves. Okay? What they started to do is make sure they didn't commit that behavior in a situation where that asshole that spanked me will catch me. Okay? So when we spank a child out of our own fear or our own anger, one, you can overdo it, but two, you're not actually extinguishing the behavior that you want them to stop doing. You're just associating spanking and fear with you. So your child starts to fear you and not respect you, and they're not going to stop taking cookies out of it. So yes, those people survived the spanking years, but no, spanking never actually worked. Okay, it just made them have probably an unhealthy relationship with their parent, but that can be debated. So those are situations in which talk about punishment and whatnot. Is one of the rules is that punishment must be congruent with the committed behavior. And that's why in parenting classes, we encourage parents to have not just one discipline style, like every time the child goes to timeout, but you have like 4 or 5 different types of discipline styles that given the situation that you can decide which one of those is best for that given situation. Okay. So that's that. All right. So the next thing we should talk about is schedules of reinforcement. Okay. Scheduled reinforcement happen either on an interval or a ratio level. Okay. Interval means that the child or the person is going to be reinforced based on time. Ratio means they're going to be reinforced based on the number of times they commit a given behavior. Okay, so let me give you some examples. Payday is a interval reinforcement because it's not based on the number of times you commit a behavior. It's based on every other Friday or whenever your pay schedule. Okay. A fixed ratio is when you commit a behavior, you're immediately reinforced for it, or you commit a behavior 2 or 3 times and you're reinforced for it. So this is what we call, kind of piecemeal work, meaning that, so for example, if we look at, counselors, okay, they don't get paid unless they do a 60-minute session. After that session, they're reinforced, okay, because they'll get paid for that. So that's a fixed thing. Or every time a child does their homework, they get a treat. That's a fixed, that's a ratio example, okay? These kind of tables come from B.F. Skinner and his work with pigeons, okay? It's kind of interesting. B.F. Skinner actually developed the first guided bomb, okay? Because what he did is he put a pigeon in front of a map of where they wanted a bomb to hit, okay? And every time the pigeon would peck on the building that the bomb was supposed to hit, it got reinforced with a little pellet of food, okay? And then they took the airplane, the pigeon in the airplane, and they had like this glass bottom to the bomb. And when the bomb was released, the pigeon would continually peck at the building that the bomb was supposed to land on, and that's what guided the bomb to its target. Okay, so that was actually our first guided bomb system. It was actually invented by B.F. Skinner. The military never actually used it. I think actually Yuma Proving Grounds actually tested it a couple times, but for some reason people felt guilty about exploding pigeons. But the reason I tell you this story is B.F. Skinner used pigeons to come up with these different interval and ratio scales. And what he found is that when you do what we call a variable ratio, it actually creates the quickest learning and the most long-lasting type of learning. Okay? What a variable ratio is person commits behavior, they get reinforced. Person commits behavior, they get reinforced. Person commits behavior, they don't get reinforced. Person commits behavior, they don't get reinforced. Person commits behavior, they don't get reinforced. Person commits behavior, they get reinforced. Okay? So it doesn't happen every time, it happens randomly. Okay? Now I want you to think about some natural examples of fixed ratio type of reinforcement, okay, that are natural in human beings. Okay? A good example is sex. Okay? We'll use husbands as the example. A husband, when he does not know when his next sex is going to come, is going to make him engage in behaviors more frequently that encourage sex. Okay? So, using this to your advantage, or you already probably do, so when you reinforce behaviors you like with sex, okay, and then you put your spouse on a random interval scale, you will see them commit those behaviors you like more and more frequently. Okay? Well, I'm just telling you, there's studies that prove it. So that's an example. So that's an example of a variable ratio schedule. Okay? The one that does not work the least, the one that works the least, is a fixed interval thing, meaning the times we get our paychecks does not actually increase our working behaviors. In fact, what we see is if you see this, it's kind of a scallop thing, okay? Is when we get our paycheck, we flatline at work for a while. And then a couple days before payday, we perform a little bit better. And then after payday, we flatline again. And then a few days before, we'll start to do a little bit better, okay? But it never actually can maintain a behavior, okay? Meaning, I mean, this sounds kind of dumb. What happens when your employer stops paying you? You don't show up to work, right? Okay. So in a fixed interval situation, what makes it so fragile is once you take away that fixed reward, the behavior automatically will extinguish and go away. Okay. Makes sense because if your employer stops paying you, you may come to work for a little while hoping that they'll get you back and they'll pay you back. But eventually and very rapidly, you're just going to stop showing up, right? Because you got to take care of your family, those kinds of things. That's a rationalization. Okay. The other two, the variable interval and the fixed ratio, are kind of the in-betweens. Okay. So rewarding a child, for example, for every behavior they commit, it does create a stronger reinforcement, but it's not as strong as when you make it random. Okay. And the same thing with the variable interval is that it works, but it's not as good as, say, the variable ratio type of schedule. Do these make sense? I think these next slides just kind of compare the different types of punishment and negative reinforcement. This one compares positive and negative reinforcement with positive punishment and negative punishment. And I'll kind of end this slide with kind of a story. So a common disciplinary tool for teenagers is to take away something of great value, PlayStation, or their phone or whatever, and that's supposed to make it so that they're good. Most parents have realized that that absolutely does not work. Okay? Has any parent ever had that? Okay. Well, let's talk about how you can actually effectively help a teenager. Okay? And we'll use the example of they're supposed to be home at 11. Okay. Again, if you do not tell the teen the consequence of that behavior, you're obeying the rules of unconditioned. So one way you can extinguish that behavior is the minute that kid gets home after curfew, that's when you go with them and you take away the PlayStation and you take away the keys to the car or the phone. Okay. Without letting them know that that was going to be the consequences, you do that, and that sometimes. However, if you really, really want the most effective technique, it's something like this. Okay. Kid goes to a party, it hits 10:50, you send the kiddo a text, hey, remember your curfew, 11, it takes you 10 minutes to get home, you better be here, right? As a kid, because of all the stimuluses around him, there's the alcohol, there's the women, there's stuff like that, he's going to do what with that text? He's going to forget it very quickly, right? So it comes to 11:05, 11:10, and this is the best thing that a mom or a dad can do. In your most elegant nightwear, like a good moo or something. Something that is just not attractive, but is very motherly. Show up to said party, knock on the door, and say, Billy, You're not home. I thought I'd come get you. Okay? That will extinguish not being home after curfew permanently. Okay? Why is that the effective tool to use? There's the embarrassment. It's a form of positive punishment that is also a social punishment. Okay? And that embarrassment in and of itself is going to make sure I'm not present a single time from there on. Okay? So, again, positive punishment trumps negative punishment. So, what's that? No, shouldn't use that. Positive punishment is better than negative punishment. To where anytime you can positive punish a teen in some type of socially embarrassing way, that is what actually can change a teen's behavior. Taking away stuff, it can work if they don't know you're going to take it away, but it's not as effective as a positive punishment. So that's kind of what this is kind of getting to right here in kind of a nutshell. All right, let's take a 10-minute break. Actually, yeah, let's take a good 10-minute break and we'll come back and we will talk about observational or what's called social learning. Okay. Before we move on to social learning, I wanted to go over an experiment that was conducted dealing with unconditioned fear and phobia. But then I also wanted to go over your assignment for, which is to condition someone or something. But I wanted to go over an experiment by John Watson. As I said, he was the father of behaviorism. And, life stories are always interesting. Is he did this research with a young lady named Rainier, and she was a graduate assistant. And Watson ended up having an affair with her. And Columbia University went to Watson and he said, okay, either you break it off with Rainier and recommit to your wife, or you're fired. Okay. Well, he actually chose to be fired, and he divorced his wife, married Rainier, and they remained married until kind of an interesting kind of. I always feel bad for the wife, but it's an interesting story because he was so much in love with her that when she passed away, he spent the last 10 years of his life locked up in his home in a deep, deep, deep depression until he eventually passed away. B.F. Skinner, which is kind of his counterpart in behaviorism, the kind of counterpart to him, B.F. Skinner was found passed away with an unwritten manuscript. He was still engaged in life. But Watson ended up But another consequence of Watson being fired is he actually ended up having an incredibly successful career in marketing. Okay? When you look at a bottle of Coca-Cola or the Golden Arches or a really flavorful display, you know, the beer commercials with hot women and hot guys and everybody having fun, you have John B. Watson to thank for those advertisements. Because Watson said if you associate good things consistently enough with a symbol, and that symbol is presented alone, that symbol will be enough to get that person to engage. So the idea of, I'm not using the term, icons, you know, like the Pepsi icon or the McDonald's icon, those were designed by John B. Watson in the early years. And he said, all you need to do in your advertising is classically condition having a really good time with the Golden Arches. And you do that enough, the Golden Arches will come to represent a good time. Okay? Based on that, he became incredibly successful in marketing using these principles of operant and classical condition. Okay? And now we're just about conditioned with everything. But one of the experiments before he left academics that he is probably most famous for is what we call the little Albert experiments. Okay? What he's going to do is take an infant named little Albert, who is not very old at all. He's only a few months old, because he wanted to show that fear is a conditioned response. So he needed to have a subject who didn't have enough life experience that there wouldn't be any interference. Okay? So what he did in his experiments is he first would present little Albert with a little white rat. Okay? And of course, what did Albert do? He just tried to grab it, tried to pet it, tried to grab it, of course tried to eat it. All the little things that an infant does when they're just born in the world. Okay? Well, in the second phase of the little Albert's experiment is Rainier, his assistant, would present the little white rat, and then Watson behind little Albert with huge sound symbols with symbol behind little Albert's ears. And of course that created a startle reflex. Okay? And so they did that, they paired that time and time again, and eventually you could present the little white rat to little Albert and he would freak out. And it would freak him out. And the interesting thing is little Albert also experienced what we call the rule of generalization. Is not only did he have a fear response to little white rats, he started having fear response to bears, stuffed bears, little white fluffy pillows, anything fluffy and white. Little Albert ended up having a fear response to it. Okay? Unfortunately, we don't know what happened to little Albert because with everything that happened, they never went through the extinguishing phase, and little Albert died at the age of 11 from disease. So we don't know if he continued to have this fear response. One of those little Albert experiments is one of the reasons why we have ethics committees today. Is that kind of experiment happened today. And I'm going to play a short video of what that looked like, and then we'll go from there.
To prove that environment is more powerful than genetics, Watson designs an experiment for an infant known as Little Albert. He's so confident, he films it for posterity. At first, Albert shows little fear, even when Watson places a burning newspaper in front of him. Albert is also unafraid when he encounters a white rat for the first time in his life. But then Watson shows Albert the rat accompanied by a loud clanging noise. One of the few things that upsets little Albert. And he does it again. And does it again. Eventually, Albert learns to fear not just the rat, but all furry things, even without the loud noise. In Watson's mind, the little Albert experiment is a success because it proves that fears are learned, not inherited.
I like that video because it shows not only what happened, but it also shows how psychologists can be sometimes. But the little Albert experiment, as I said, when we get to phobias, really kind of show the best way how phobias are actually created. They're created through classically conditioned situations. A child, their experience with stimuli, and contingencies that occur. So, and we'll also talk about the best way to get rid of phobias is actually through exposure. Okay? And exposure therapy is the only way really to get rid of a phobic response to something. And we'll get to that when we get to that one in a second. But I wanted to show that these are the principles of classical conditioning. And that's a little Albert experiment, well, slightly unethical, shows how the pairing, little Albert didn't need to do anything to learn the association between his startle response and the little white rat. Okay? All it needed to do is be paired with something that startles you and has that effect. Okay? So your assignment, and I'll actually email out the instructions so that for those who know. If you have an alternative email, can you put it on the sign-up sheet? I know everyone doesn't check their all right, this is going to be your assignment. So I don't want you to use punishment, but what I want you to do is I want you to classically condition someone, and then I want you to operantly condition them to do a behavior that you would like them to see. It needs to be a positive behavior. Okay? Don't create any killers. Okay? But this is what I want you to do for the first week. Okay, Isabel, is I want you to, first of all, whoever you're going to do this with, a human being, I want you to actually list some very positive qualities about that person, okay? And keep that list with you. Okay? Then I want you to choose, you gotta be careful with this, a part of their body that you don't commonly touch. Okay? Ladies, keep it clean. All right? You don't want to touch those parts of the body because then you're going to be conditioning something you don't want. Okay? But let's say with Isabel, me and Isabel are good friends, but I never really touch her on the shoulder. Okay? So I'm going to choose this spot to classically condition. And what I'm going to do for the next week or so is I'm going to randomly, keep this in mind, it needs to be random. I'm going to randomly go up to Isabel and go, touch her when you're saying, Isabel, eyes. Isabel, you're so unique. Okay. Isabel, I like the way you dress. Isabel, Isabel, I love it. Okay. Now, what you should see by the end of the week, by doing this randomly, you should do it like 5 to 10 times a day, just really randomly, is you should be able to, by like Friday or Saturday, simply go up and touch Isabel there, and you'll see this. response. You'll just see them just feel. Okay. All right. That is the classical conditioning part of this assignment. Okay. So you're associating touch with a positive affirmation. Okay. And the result should be, by doing this 5 to 10 random times per day, is by Friday or Saturday, you should be able to go up and touch them, and you should be able to feel their positivity, kind of. They just feel good, right? And we already know how this works. There's certain parts of our bodies that anyone can touch that are just okay. So you understand how this is going to work, right? But it needs to be a neutral part of the body. The second thing is I want you to pick a behavior. Now remember, it has to be a behavior. It can't be an attitude. It can't be a belief system. It can't be a mood state. I want you to pick a behavior that then you could operantly condition. Okay? So let me give you some examples. One of them is really, really cute. Okay? I had a young man who was just totally heads over heels for this girl. I mean, he loved her. But the one thing that she did not like to do is give him a hug. Okay? So he decided to operantly condition her to give him hugs. Okay? So for the first week, he conditioned one of her hands. And he just simply, he had instead of like 10 or 20 items, this kid had like a list of 100. All right. And throughout that week, he would just touch that part of her hand and all that gross stuff that people in love say to each other. Okay. And then he would put himself in different situations. Probably the one that sticks out in my mind is it said when we were walking down the hall or at a mall or something, he would fake a trip. So he would be walking with her and he would stumble a trip. What do women naturally do when we see people do that? Right? Okay. So you see where this is going. So he would trip, she would reach out, and he would almost eventually, by doing this, she would just randomly, not knowing why, just come up and just give him a hug without him having to do the whole stumble. Because of that conditioning. And he goes, it's so great, I don't even need to touch her hand anymore. She just does it. Okay? That's an example of operant conditioning. I always thought that one was a cute example because how he came up with it. Another example is one of my moms got her son to do his homework at a certain time. Okay? Now this one actually took a little bit longer, so this assignment for her ended up being a month. So she did the whole classical conditioning thing, and I think it was his shoulder or something like that. And what she did is she set up opportunities for him to sit at a table at a certain time first. That was step one. Okay. So maybe she put something kind of interesting on the table, like a cartoon on a tablet or something like that. And at a certain time, she would go up and she would touch him on the shoulder. Okay. And she got it to where he would be sitting at the table at a certain time every day without anything being there. Okay. The next step is she put his homework there. Okay. But instead of reinforcing him for being there at a time, at that certain time, she reinforced him whenever he would touch the homework. So at that 5 o'clock, if he just started scrambling through, she'd go up, touch his shoulder. Go up, touch his shoulder. Eventually, he would actually start just doing his homework. And mom would go up and touch his shoulder. And as, again, another success story, eventually that kid was there at 5 o'clock every day, ready to do his homework. Okay. That one took a little bit longer, but you kind of get the point. So does this make sense what I want you to do? Okay, and I'll email you the instructions of how to do it. But basically, you're going to classically condition a touch with a positive affirmation. And then you're going to use that classically conditioned touch to modify some behavior. This can also be done with your pets. I know one person conditioned his goldfish to swim through this hoop. Okay, the classically conditioned part was whenever he would feed the fish, he would take the stick and rub the goldfish's belly as the goldfish was eating. Okay. Eventually, he could do his little stick, and the goldfish would do eating-like behavior. So he knew that he had that classic condition. Okay. And then, you know, put up this hoop. First, it was underwater. And he was very patient. He waited for that fish to go through that hoop, and he stuck the stick in there and rubbed the goldfish's belly, and eventually lifted the hoop up until it was out of the water. And by progressively doing that, eventually the goldfish to jump through the outside the water. So I do not recommend doing a cat. I've had people try before. Cats, don't do a cat. Just save yourself the energy. Dogs do respond to awkward conditioning really well. I've had people get their dogs to jump through hoops, zip blades, all those kinds of stuff. Again, through giving a treat, petting a certain part of the body, giving a treat, petting, and then watching the dog try to get that behavior and then rubbing the dog in that spot. So it does work with dogs, men, fish. So there you go. So does that make sense what I want you to do? Okay, and I'll email the instructions probably on Monday. Okay, so that will be your assignment. All right. So before lunch, let's talk about our last topic of learning, which is, again, observational, aka social learning. And again, this is a uniquely human learning ability. We don't see this type of learning in any other type of species. Again, it is when you're able to take in multiple other behaviors, manipulate it in your mind to create your own, sometimes new and unique behaviors. Okay? It has to deal with our mentalizing system and our ability to manipulate situations. Okay? Social learning is why sometimes when we're stressed as parents, we get frustrated because we realize we're acting like our parents. And it's that same kind of process. Okay? Observation learning takes kind of four types of things. One, you have to attend to a given behavior. So you need to watch mom, you need to watch dad or the teacher. You have to have some type of retention, meaning that you actually have to observe it in a situation where you're actually paying attention to it. Okay? And then eventually, and in little children, this is through play, you have to have a motor reproduction. So child looks at mom and dad interaction, and then they go play house. They go to the doctor's office, they watch the doctor, and they go home and they play doctor. They watch you guys in the classroom and whatnot, and then they go home and they play teacher. Okay. And then there has to be some internal or external reinforcement. So this is when mom comes in the room and goes, "You'll make a great teacher someday, sweetheart." Or when the two kids are playing house and interacting with each other, they enjoy that situation. Okay, that's reinforcing. Versus if they end up getting in an argument and upset with each other and it goes badly, that is not reinforcing, so it probably won't occur again. Okay. So this is kind of the idea behind reinforcement. The person that is famous for it is Albert Bandura. And the specific research that is associated with this is what we call the Bobo doll experiments. Okay, Bobo. So kind of a rock. It's remember, I don't know if they still have them. It's those blow up boxing things where there's weight at the bottom and you hit it and it comes back up again. Okay, that's a Bobo doll, or was called a Bobo doll back then. Okay, what Bandura wanted to know or try to investigate is whether or not aggressive behaviors are learned or are they innate. Okay. So what he did is he had, on the first day, he would have teachers come in, and either the teacher would be really rough with the doll. They would hit it with a hammer. They would be frustrated with it while they're trying to get it all blown up and everything. Versus other children would witness a teacher who would just come in, they would blow up the doll, and everything would be just fine. Okay. The second day was what we call the dependent variable. Is they put the Bobo doll and the teacher in the room again, and they observed what the child would do when interacting with that Bobo doll. Okay. I'll explain the results because they're a little bit more complicated than the popular results. If they witnessed the teacher being mean to the doll, they were mean and aggressive the next day. If they witnessed the teacher who wasn't good, who was good with the doll, they were good with the doll the next day. The results are a bit more complicated than that, but we'll get to them in a minute. I just wanted to show a short clip on what the Bobo doll experiments kind of look like.
The model pummeled the doll with the mallet, flung it in the air, kicked it repeatedly, threw it down, and beat it. It was once widely believed that seeing others vent aggression would drain the viewers of the eye. As you can see, exposure to aggressive modeling is highly high. Exposure to aggressive modeling increased attraction to guns, even though it was never modeled. Guns had less appeal to children who had no exposure to the aggressive modeling. The children also picked up the novel hostile language.
All right. So this was kind of the research paradigm, is that the kids would mimic the behavior of the model the day before. Okay. Now this has been used in popular culture to show that aggression is modeled, that when you have an aggressive environment, that results in an aggressive child. And that's represented here in this first one. So this means these kids were more positive, more aggressive than these kiddos here. But the actual Bobo doll experiments are a bit more complicated than that, because they were what we call a 2x2 model. You see, the next day, the teacher didn't just come in and observe the child. The next day, the teacher either came in and acted non-aggressive, or the teacher came in and acted aggressively. and then they observed what the child's response to that would be. When we put it in this direction, we have actually a different result. Okay? When the next day, the following day, the teacher acted aggressively again, the children who had the aggression modeled the day before were less aggressive than the children who have the non-aggressive behavior model. Okay? It is only in the condition when the teacher acted non-aggressive that the children who modeled the aggression were more aggressive than the non-aggressive kids. Okay? So this is an interesting extension of the popular notion that aggression is modeled, because if you see someone aggressive in day one, and then you see them aggressive again in day two, you will actually act less aggressive. Okay, that does not make sense. What additionally doesn't make sense is if you did not witness the teacher being aggressive the day before, but then the teacher is aggressive today, you will be aggressive. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So what's happening in this situation? Because the popular model is that if a child witnesses aggression in the home, they will be aggressive in other situations. But that's directly contradicted with the Bobo dog experiment. So how do we explain these results? What's going wrong? What's that? Yeah, I want you to think about this. So you witness a teacher who's really aggressive in day one. Okay, so there's a teacher pounding the doll and doing all that thing. And then they're aggressive again in day two. Okay, are you going to be aggressive in that situation? And the answer is no. What you're going to do is try to avoid asshole. Okay, you know that aggression begets aggression, and this teacher is doing the same thing. Okay, this child in the non-aggressive thing is just modeling what the teacher is doing the second day, because the teacher's behavior is changing, and so this child is going to want to try and this aggressive behavior out. Okay. Whereas in this non-aggressive situation, the child who witnessed aggression the day before is going to be kind of like, I want to try that behavior out, and it's safe for me to do so. Okay. Where in this child, non-aggression and non-aggression, the day is just another consistent day. Okay. So this introduces the idea of cognitive models, in that we make decisions about how we're going to act today based on our previous experiences with that stimuli in the past. Okay? And indeed, there has been a lot of research done on the connection between violent video games and violent TV and violence behavior. Okay? And the conclusion as of right now is that it's not the amount of violence that causes increase in aggressive behaviors that we see often in video games. Okay? The association between video games and aggression deals with the amount of competition that video game introduces. Right? So for example, we can have children play the non-online version of single-player first shooter ones, like Battlefield and anybody else know the names of those first shooter games? Those really violent, you go and you just shoot everyone out and blood everywhere. And if you do it not online, you're not competing. Yeah, Call of Duty. And then we have other children play the football game Madden. Okay? And then we're going to measure the level of aggression afterwards. If seeing severe violence begets more aggression, Call of Duty should produce more aggressive behaviors than playing Madden. But actually, Madden creates more aggressive and violent behavior than Call of Duty does. Because the level of competition in the game Madden is much higher than in the game of Call of Duty. So it's not actually the amount of violence in a video game or in a TV show that creates aggression. It is the amount of competition that a child views that increases aggressive and violent behavior. Okay? So playing Madden is actually worse than playing Call of Duty. So, but we can see though that these associations between witnessing something and aggression is much more complicated. This child here has learned when to be aggressive and when not to be aggressive. Okay? And this child here is still in the learning phase. Okay? Competition increases our violence, not the actual violence increases our violence. Okay? And so these different things are the association between witnessing something and experiencing something. Okay? Another common example that is used to indicate violence is children who witness domestic violence in the home. Okay, there are a lot of negative outcomes for children who witness domestic violence. But an interesting thing is witnessing violence better or worse than experiencing violence? And so we're going to have two types of violent homes. One violent home is where the child knows the violence is going on, but they don't directly experience it. In the other home, we're going to have a child where the child is also part of the violence. They get beat and physically assaulted, sexually assaulted as well. Okay. Which child has the better outcome? Which one do you think has the better outcome? The witness? You're wrong. The child who actually directly experiences the violence will have a better psychological outcome than the child who only witnesses the violence. Okay. Children who only witness the violence have a lot harder time and are more likely to be diagnosed with a psychological disorder as they grow and develop. Okay. So why do you think that is? The child who experienced it knows what it feels like. Okay? They don't need to cognize it. They know when someone hits you across the face, it hurts. And so that introduces choice. Okay? Directly experiencing it allows the child to have a choice of when they grow up to either commit violence or not commit violence. A child who merely witnesses it can only have it experienced in their head over and over and over. And they can only create a mental model of what that pain and that hurt must feel like. All right? Therefore, they can't escape it. They can't just go hit someone and be done, or choose not to hit someone and be done. That abuse stays in the mind, okay? And it creates more psychological problems. So, in this case, witnessing versus having it committed to you actually has a worse outcome. The other thing we should say, though, too, is there's this notion that all children who are abused and harmed or witness domestic violence will themselves become abusers and victims. Okay? That's actually a play on words, because actually only about 30 to 40% of children who witness or experience domestic violence as children will become abusers as adults or victims as adults. Only 30 to 40%. Okay. But when we look at that 30 to 40% that do, this is where this gets twisted. Of the 30 to 40% that do end up becoming abusers or becoming victims, about 95% of them experience child abuse in their past. Okay, so of abusers, of victims, about 95% had experienced abuse as children. Okay. So the actuality is that just experiencing domestic violence or abuse as a child does not state that that child will become an abuser or a victim as an adult. Okay. But adult abusers and victims tended to have abuse occurred in their childhood. Okay. So the connection between violence experiences in childhood and experiences in adulthood is more complicated than just experience. Does that make sense? Okay. So we need to be mindful that of these situations, especially when we're trying to do what's in the best interest, but we also have to remember that not all negatives result in a negative. Does that make sense? Okay. Things can't change. And as I said, if only 30 to 40% become abusers as an adult or victims as an adult, that means 60 to 70% don't. And that's a good. That's the experience of child abuse as a whole with domestic violence. So that's no, yeah, it's physical, sexual, mental is a little bit harder. That's why we have that error rate of about 1%. Okay, because physical abuse you can measure directly. Sexual abuse is pretty obvious. Emotional abuse is where we get a lot of variation. And so that's why we say 30 to 40% versus just a good solid number. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's some hope, right? Okay. And that there's some things that can be done, and that just being in a violent home does not necessarily equate to being a violent person as an adult. And that's an important message to keep in mind. Okay. Any questions on that? All right. So we need to talk about what's called the downfall of behavior. Like I said, behaviorism ignored the mind and the mental processes. Okay? And there's two areas that ended up kind of ruining or diminishing the strength of behaviorism and understanding that everything isn't just classically and optimally conditioned. Because I want you to remember, behaviorists felt that everything we do as human beings were either operantly or classically conditioned. Okay? And the first downfall of behaviorism came in an argument between B.F. Skinner and Noam Chomsky. Okay? Noam Chomsky is known in two arenas. He's a linguist. He studies language, but he's also hugely into politics. And in fact, the interesting thing about Noam Chomsky is he's probably one of the most famous linguists in the world. He just started this fall at the University of Arizona. So he's actually teaching at U of A. So kind of an interesting thing. But B.F. Skinner wrote this paper on how language develops purely out of operant and classical conditioning. And Noam Chomsky, who was just a graduate student at the time, was charged with reading and critiquing his paper. Okay? Now, in the field of science, when you're critiquing somebody else's work, usually you write this one-page thing down. It's a couple paragraphs. You send it back to the editors or the reviewers and say, this is my feedback. Okay. Noam Chomsky instead, so B.F. Skinner's paper was like 15 pages long. Noam Chomsky's response was 42 pages long. Okay. But the basic argument came down to is, if you can imagine, remember kids learn somewhere between 60 to 70,000 words by the age of 6. Okay. Not only do they learn those words, they learn how to grammatically put those words together into nouns, to verbs, to sentences. So the amount of learning that occurs is there's approximately around 1.3 million bytes of information a child has to learn in order to gain an understanding of language. Okay. Noam Chomsky's argument was, do you remember your mom reinforcing you 1.5 million times every time you opened your mouth to say a word? So when you first said daddy, she probably said good job. But when she said daddy is a dork, she probably didn't reinforce that. Maybe. Depends. She might have. Okay. But the fact that a mom reinforcing a child for every single grammatical rule, for every single word, is kind of nonsense. Okay. And so there has to be some other mechanism that creates and develops language, was Noam Chomsky's basic argument. Okay. And so there was that. So people started to think, well, you know, there's other aspects of life that is very complex that was not reinforced. And so why is it that we can do this? The other research that occurred at the time was what was called the Tolman studies and what became known as mental maps. Okay. These are kind of the ideas shaping non-human organisms, creative human minds working on habits generalization. Okay. But Noam Chomsky, but Tolman's arguments for the idea that we have to take cognition into account, the way we think into account, is his work with lab rats. Okay. What Tolman would do, and this one is the best example, is he would have these complex mazes, okay? And he would have the rat start at one end and have the food at another, and the rat would go and explore and find all of the different routes to get to the food, okay? And then what Tolman would do is he would purposely block some routes to the food, all right? Now, if classical and operant conditioning were true, what should happen is that the rat should just go back to the start point and just try and figure out what to do from there. Because his path to the food was cut off, and therefore there should not be any alternative route to get the food, and so he should give up. But instead, what Tolman found is if, let's say, we block the food right here, the rat, we can say intuitively, would then just take an alternative route to get to the food, okay, without having to have anything else learned, right? And that's the important part. And so what Tolman argued is that rats, and the extent of this to human, have a cognitive map. Okay? And it's this cognitive map that we navigate our world. If you want an example of a cognitive map, have you really tired. And so you drive home, and you get home, and you have no freaking clue how you got home. Anybody ever experienced that? All right. Okay. That is an example of your cognitive map because your brain has said you're worn out, so I'm going to put you on automatic for a minute, and I'm going to use what I know about this landscape that you have ingrained in your brain, and I'm going to get you home. Okay. And so it's this cognitive mapping idea that we have to hold information in our brain to commit certain behaviors was the second downfall to behaviorism. Okay. Kind of some interesting things about this mental map is actually recent brain studies, all right? This is kind of a cool thing. When you go somewhere new, your brain turns on a cell just for that location, okay? So you have a brain cell for this classroom. And then when you start to think about how you're going to go home, your brain will turn on that cell, and then it'll turn on the cell that is associated with the parking lot, with Highway 86. And let's say you live in Tucson, the construction zone, all of those different cells will start to fire as you think about how you're going to get home. But no other cells will. So this idea of a cognitive map is something that actually does physically exist in your brain, in that you have dedicated cells for each location you've been in. All right. Now this is also why sometimes you can go to your hometown and you can navigate it like you always had before, even though the landscape may have changed, right? So when I go home, I think about this mall I used to work at that was in the middle of nowhere. They purposely put it in a farming area, but now it's just huge. Okay. But my brain can still navigate all of those streets, even though the environment itself has changed significantly. Okay. So that is kind of how our cognitive map works, and recent neurological evidence suggests that you actually have a cell for each location you've existed in. And when you start thinking about them, that's what navigates you through those situations. Okay. All right. Yeah, I think it is too good. I don't even know if they've left to get lunch. Well, you know what? Because your professor is absent-minded and cannot think of what I was about to say for the next half hour, well, let's do this. Let's go ahead and break now, and I'll message Alex and say, hey, we're ready for food. But if we break now and then we just do like to 12:30, we'll start at 12:30 instead of 1, and then we'll get out of here soon. How does that sound? All right. Sound like a plan? Let's do it. All right. Yes, it's